All right, welcome back. This is your last one for Unit 5, Introduction to Sustainability. It's an introduction because sustainability will really be a thread that we carry throughout the rest of the semester, so this is going to be pretty short today. So what is sustainability? This means that if we're living sustainably or we're using something sustainably, it means we're able to use that particular resource for future generations or indefinitely. That means we're keeping in mind that there are generations past us that will need to use this same resource, so we need to use it in such a way that it's still available to them, but still be able to use it ourselves. So sustainability doesn't mean that you're not using something at all. It just means that you're aware of how much you're using. Now, another way to look at this would be saying that the inputs are equal to the outputs. So a really great example of this would be a well. So remember, wells are sources of groundwater, and groundwater sources need to be recharged. If we are pulling from that well and using it as a water source, then it's being recharged at the exact same rate that we're pulling water out of it, then we would say that we're using it sustainably, because presumably the level of water within the actual groundwater storage should never really increase or decrease. It should always sort of remain the same. Now, if we're using something unsustainably, if we keep with the well example, that means we're pulling water out of the well faster than it can be recharged. That's the example of what's happening at the Ogallala Aquifer in the Great Plains area, in the middle of the United States, right? We're pulling water out of that much faster for our agricultural needs, faster than it can really be recharged, in which case at some point, which it can be calculated, but at some point, the aquifer itself will no longer have water in it if we continue to use it at the rate that we're doing it at. Another example of not using something sustainably or being unsustainable with something is our consumption of fossil fuels. We use fossil fuels much faster than they replenish. So remember, fossil fuels are once living organisms that have been compressed with heat and pressure over time and turned into like those coals or those natural gases or those oils that we like to use. The problem is that process takes millions of years. And so we're using those fossil fuels much faster than they will ever be able to be produced. So at some point, we will run out of fossil fuels. That doesn't mean that there won't be more fossil fuels on our planet at some point. They just will not be available within our lifetime. So some environmental indicators that tell us whether or not we're using something sustainably. Firstly is biological diversity. We know that more biodiverse ecosystems tend to be more resistant to disturbances. So we can sort of identify if we are interacting with an ecosystem in a healthy way or in a sustainable way, depending on how that ecosystem reacts to disturbances and the relative levels of biodiversity that are within that ecosystem. Now, this becomes challenging as we continue to disrupt ecosystems, as we continue to build over ecosystems, deforest, etc. Food production. The question would be, are we sustainably using soil? Because poor practices and overuse of soil can lead to degradation, can lead to water pollution, and those are all forms of not using land sustainably. So we would need to ensure in our food production methods that those practices are leading to soil that can continue to be used for multiple generations, and that the use of that soil isn't leading to further problems like runoff causing eutrophication or other types of water pollution. And then the human population itself, we know that exponential growth puts a strain on our planet because it requires more resources. And of course, that resource consumption, are we using those resources sustainably? And is the rate of human population growth going to be problematic for maintaining sustainable use of resources? And then, of course, resource depletion itself. If I continue to use at this rate right now, will it be available in the future for more generations? So how do we determine if we're actually living sustainably? We've already sort of mentioned this term. It's called the maximum sustainable yield. Maximum sustainable yield, or MSY, is the maximum amount of a resource that can be harvested or taken without compromising the availability of that resource for future generations. We often say that the MSY, or the maximum sustainable yield, is at approximately half the carrying capacity. So it's when we're experiencing exponential growth of that particular resource. However, most people will say that the maximum sustainable yield is actually less than what we think it is, because there's always externalities that we're not accounting for that may affect the actual reproduction of that resource. So it's always better to come in just under the MSY and anticipate that there will be something that impacts the exponential growth before it reaches its carrying capacity. The other thing is, it's very easy to miscalculate an exponential or MSW, just because, again, these externalities, you never really know what's going to happen, natural disasters, etc. So how do we actually calculate that maximum sustainable yield, or how do we do our best to harvest a sustainable yield? Takes time, research, planning, really truly understanding the reproductive abilities of a resource. So for instance, when we talk about getting a hunting license, they tell you how many deer you can kill if you're a hunter annually based on the areas that you're going to be hunting in. They tell you how many males you can take, how many females you can take. And the whole goal is we don't want to completely deplete the population of deer in this area. But we also don't want too many deer, because we know that they tend to be herbivores that will overtake an area very quickly. So the research and planning of that is, okay, well, how many offspring are we seeing on average? How many deer do we have? How many are people going to catch or hunt for? What's going to be remaining? Is that enough to make the population stable enough next year, etc.? So that takes years of sort of planning and understanding the ecosystem, and that in turn goes with setting quotas and limits for how much somebody can take. Now, this really applies to a lot of things, fishing as well, cutting down trees, how much oil can be extracted at a given rate. It's all kind of in the same breath here. And then, of course, requiring permits. So if we continue with our deer hunting example, not everybody can just go out there. You need a permit. And that allows us to keep track of how many people are actually out there hunting and taking from the reserve of whatever is out there. Or whatever it is, permits for cutting down trees, permits for mining. It allows us to sort of keep track of who is taking what and where it's going. And then reforesting after deforestation. So yes, we're taking trees, but can we replant more to ensure that there will be a forest for the next time round when somebody needs to harvest trees again? And then always looking towards the future, always keeping in mind those future generations with every decision that we make to ensure that there's something left behind. Okay, that's the last slide. That's the last bit of Unit 5. And if you have questions, you can let me know, but I'll see you on Monday. Thanks, guys.